February 28, 1944, Royal Air Force Debden, England, 40 miles north of London. The dark, early morning air echoes with the deep growl of Packard Merlin engines warming up on the flight line. But these are not Spitfires. They are brand new P-51 Mustangs, fresh from the factory, still smelling of new paint. Most of the pilots climbing into their cockpits have never flown this plane before, not even once. No practice flights, no familiarization runs. Standing next to the lead aircraft is a 26-year-old lieutenant colonel with ice in his veins and fire in his eyes. His name is Donald James Matthew Blakeslee. He has just made a bold promise to his commanding general that he will have every pilot in this unit ready to fight in these new planes within 24 hours. By tomorrow morning, they'll be combat ready. When General William Kepner asked how his men could learn to fly a completely new aircraft that fast, Blakeslee's answer was calm and insane. They'll learn on the way to the target. 4 days later, these same pilots would escort B-17 Flying Fortresses all the way to Berlin. It would be the first time single-engine fighters had ever reached Germany's capital, an 1,100-mile mission. This flight would change the air war over Europe forever. It marked the beginning of the end for the Luftwaffe, proving that one man's faith in his aircraft could turn strategic bombing from a death sentence into a weapon of precision and power. This is not the story of how technology beat Germany. It's the story of how one former Royal Canadian Air Force pilot, who joined the fight before America entered the war, turned a good fighter plane into the Luftwaffe's worst nightmare. It's the story of how aggressive leadership, tactical brilliance, and absolute trust in his men and their aircraft allowed Don Blakeslee to do what no one thought possible: bring the air war to Germany's doorstep and never look back. The North American P-51 Mustang was never meant to be a high-altitude escort fighter. When its prototype first flew on October 26, 1940, it was designed for the British as a fast, low-level fighter-bomber. Powered by an Allison V1710 engine producing about 1,000 horsepower, the early Mustangs were excellent below 15,000 feet, reaching speeds up to 386 miles per hour, faster than almost anything in the air at that time. The British loved it for ground attacks and reconnaissance missions. But above 25,000 feet, where bomber formations fought their battles, the Allison engine couldn't keep up. Its single-stage supercharger couldn't compress enough air at high altitude, causing it to lose power. At 25,000 feet, where Luftwaffe fighters like the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 119 hunted bombers, the early Mustang was simply outclassed. Then, the Royal Air Force had an idea. What if they replaced the Allison engine with something built for high altitude, like the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, the same two-stage, two-speed supercharged engine used in the legendary Spitfire? In October 1942, Rolls-Royce engineers in England completed the first conversion, calling it the Mustang X. The results were incredible. The aircraft could now reach 440 miles per hour at 28,000 feet, climb like a rocket, handle beautifully at high altitude, and still keep the Mustang's long range. Its service ceiling jumped to 42,000 feet. Across the Atlantic, North American aviation took notice. Using the Packard-built version of the Merlin engine, they started their own conversion program. The Packard V1650-7 produced 1,490 horsepower at 3,000 RPM and could hit 1,720 horsepower in emergency power. By June 1943,
the first P-51B Mustangs rolled off the production line in Inglewood, California. Each was powered by the Packard Merlin and armed with 4 .50 caliber Browning machine guns. The Merlin Mustang's performance was outstanding, but what made it revolutionary was its fuel capacity. It carried 184 gallons internally, plus an 85-gallon fuselage tank behind the pilot and 2 108-gallon drop tanks under the wings, a total of 401 gallons. At a cruise rate of about 60 gallons per hour, a Mustang could stay in the air for over 7 hours. That endurance gave it something no Allied fighter had before: the range to fly to Berlin and back.
And escort the bombers all the way. 7 hours. That was all it took. Enough time to fly from England to Berlin, fight over the target, and make it back home. No other fighter in the world could do that. Not the P-47 Thunderbolt, which struggled to reach even 600 miles from base, even with drop tanks. Not the P-38 Lightning, which often broke down in Europe's cold skies, its Allison engines failing at high altitude. Not even the Spitfire, as brilliant as it was, could go that far. It was built as a short-range interceptor. Only the P-51B Mustang could follow the bombers wherever they went and stay with them the entire mission. But by late 1943, when the first P-51Bs arrived in England, they weren't sent to the 8th Air Force's veteran fighter groups. Instead, the Pentagon, in all its bureaucratic logic, assigned them to new 9th Air Force units meant for ground attack missions. Because the older Allison-powered Mustangs had been used for that purpose, officials decided that the new Merlin-powered Mustang should also be labeled a tactical aircraft, even though it was completely different. They ignored the fact that the 8th Air Force was bleeding over Germany, losing bomber after bomber because no fighter could escort them all. Rules were rules. But one man refused to accept them. His name was Don Blakeslee. By December 1943, he had been fighting the Luftwaffe longer than almost any American still alive. Donald James Matthew Blakeslee was born on September 11, 1917, in Fairport Harbor, Ohio. As a boy, he would go to the Cleveland National Air Races, only 30 miles from home, and watch in awe as the planes roared past, amazed by their speed, sound, and the bravery of pilots pushing their machines to the limit. Even then, he knew he wanted to fly. In 1930, at age 21, while working at the Diamond Alkali Chemical Plant, Blakeslee and a friend saved enough money to buy a Piper J-3 Cub airplane. They joined a small flying school, exchanging use of their plane for free flying lessons. Blakeslee loved flying, but he didn't have the money to turn it into a career. Then, in 1940, tragedy struck. His friend crashed their Cub. That moment forced Blakeslee to make a decision that would change his life forever. In October 1940, before America had even entered the war, he crossed into Canada and joined the Royal Canadian Air Force. The Battle of Britain was raging, and Blakeslee wanted to fight. After completing his pilot training, he was sent to England in January 1941, where he joined the No. 401 Squadron, Royal Air Force, flying Spitfires. He was good, exceptionally good. He earned a Distinguished Flying Cross and quickly gained valuable combat experience. In June 1942, he was transferred to No. 132 Squadron, one of the RAF's 3 Eagle squadrons, made up entirely of American volunteer pilots. By August, he had been promoted to squadron leader. When King George VI visited the Eagle squadrons to present medals, Blakeslee stood proudly before him and received his Distinguished Flying Cross from the King's own hand. By September 1942, the Eagle squadrons had proven themselves again and again. They were the RAF's most battle-hardened American pilots, and the U.S. Air Forces needed them badly. On September 12, 1942, all three Eagle squadrons were officially transferred to U.S. Command, forming the 4th Fighter Group of the 8th Fighter Command, redesignated as the 334th, 335th, and 336th Fighter Squadrons. Blakeslee, now a captain, was given command of the 335th Squadron. By then, he had logged over 240 hours in Spitfires, and he understood air combat better than most pilots ever would. More than that, he believed one thing above all else: aggression wins air battles.
The mission was simple: protect the bombers by shooting down the enemy fighters. But Don Blakeslee had a better idea: destroy the enemy before they even reached the bombers. Better yet, catch them on the ground. Most of all, make the enemy so afraid that they wouldn't even dare to fight. At first, the 4th Fighter Group flew Spitfires, the British fighters, now marked with American stars instead of RAF Roundels. Later, they switched to the P-47 Thunderbolt. Blakeslee hated the P-47. Sure, it was strong, powerful, and could take a lot of damage, but it was heavy and didn't have enough range. To him, flying it felt like trying to fly a bathtub compared to the fast, light Spitfire. By January 1944, Blakeslee had been promoted to lieutenant colonel and was now commanding the entire 4th Fighter Group. He was only 26 years old. His message to his pilots was short and clear: "We're here to destroy the Luftwaffe and shoot the Germans out of the sky, and that's exactly what we'll do." But first, he needed better planes. He needed P-51 Mustangs. In December 1933, Blakeslee was temporarily assigned to the 354th Fighter Group, the first unit to receive the new Merlin-powered Mustangs. He flew the P-51B for the first time and immediately fell in love with it. It had everything he wanted: the speed of a Spitfire, the range no other fighter had, and the handling to stay tight in formation or in combat. It was smooth, responsive at all altitudes, and could match or beat anything the Luftwaffe had. By late December, Blakeslee returned to the 4th Fighter Group with one goal: to get his pilots into Mustangs as soon as possible. He pushed General Kepner relentlessly, arguing that the 4th, one of the most experienced groups in the theater, deserved the best aircraft available. Kepner resisted. The official policy was to give Mustangs to new fighter groups first. The older, battle-tested groups would keep their P-47s, since switching to a new aircraft usually took weeks of ground school, training, and familiarization. That meant the 4th would be grounded and inactive during the transition, something no commander wanted. Blakeslee made him a promise: "Give me the airplanes, and my pilots will be ready to fight within 24 hours." Kepner thought he was crazy. Blakeslee told him, "We'll learn how to fly them on the way to the target." Knowing Blakeslee's reputation and realizing what the group could accomplish, Kepner finally agreed. On February 28, 1944, the 4th Fighter Group received its new P-51 Mustangs. Blakeslee kept his word. The very next day, February 29th, the group flew its first combat mission in the Mustangs. Some pilots had less than 1 hour of flight time in their new planes. On the way to the front, they learned how to handle the engines, adjust the guns, manage fuel systems, and fly in formation. Just 4 days later, on March 4th, the 4th Fighter Group escorted B-17 and B-24s all the way to Berlin, the first time single-engine fighters had ever made the 1,100-mile round trip. The Luftwaffe showed up in force, but Blakeslee's men shot down several enemy aircraft. More importantly, The bombers reached their targets, dropped their loads, and made it home with acceptable losses. Then, on March 6, they did it again. This mission became a turning point. More than 680 bombers attacked Berlin in daylight, escorted by hundreds of fighters, many of them P-51 Mustangs. The Luftwaffe scrambled to defend the capital, and a massive air battle erupted over Germany. When it was over, American pilots claimed 75 enemy aircraft destroyed. The 8th Air Force lost 69 bombers, but the message was clear. The tide of the air war over Europe was beginning to turn.
The losses were terrible for the Luftwaffe. About 160 fighters lost, pilots they could not replace. Don Blakeslee was officially credited as the first pilot in the U.S. Army Air Forces to fly a single-engine fighter over Berlin. 2 days later, at age 26, he was promoted to full colonel. But Blakeslee saw something that many top commanders did not. Taking the P-51 to Berlin was not just a tactical success, it was a strategic victory. Destroying the Luftwaffe was a strategic necessity. And the way to destroy the Luftwaffe was not to wait for enemy fighters to attack the bombers. It was to hunt the fighters wherever they were, pull them out, attack them, or catch them fleeing, and destroy them on the ground if possible. The idea was to make the Luftwaffe afraid to fly over its own skies. Early in 1944, Major General James Doolittle took command of the 8th Air Force. He made a crucial decision. The main job of fighter escorts was not merely to stay with the bombers at all costs. Their primary mission was to find and destroy German fighters anywhere and anytime, in flight, on the ground, attacking bombers, or trying to escape. The goal? Force the Luftwaffe onto the defensive and keep them from dominating the skies. Blakeslee embraced this doctrine with fierce enthusiasm. He pioneered a new tactic that surprised everyone who saw it. During big bomber raids, he would park some Mustangs high above the fighting and circle there, listening to several radio channels. From that height, he could see the whole tactical picture beneath him: friendly formations, enemy moves, and the openings the Luftwaffe left. From this vantage point, he would direct his squadrons by radio, guiding them to targets, coordinating attacks, and arranging the air battle like a three-dimensional game of chess. Pilots watching him were astonished at how he kept control of dozens of planes, friendly and enemy, all moving at more than 300 miles per hour, fighting separate melees at the same time. Still, Blakeslee kept perfect situational awareness. He managed his forces so precisely that it seemed superhuman. His leadership style was simple and direct. He told his pilots, "I'll fly your tail for you. If you stick with me, fine. If you don't want to, I don't need you." He led from the front, flying more missions than most, taking the same risks he asked of his men, and never asking them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. The results were extraordinary. In April 1944, the 4th Fighter Group's 336th Squadron reported destroying 26 enemy planes and damaging 16 in a single mission, the best single-mission score ever claimed by a U.S. Army Air Forces squadron. The 4th became the first fighter group in the European theater to reach 400 confirmed kills, then 500, then 600, then 700. They were relentless. Just 2 months after receiving P-51 Mustangs, the 4th Fighter Group passed 500 confirmed kills. The Luftwaffe was losing experienced pilots faster than it could replace them. Aircraft production continued and even increased under Germany's Minister of Armaments, Albert Speer. But training a skilled fighter pilot takes years, and Germany didn't have years or even months left. They didn't have the fuel either to give new pilots the practice they needed. Over the coming decades, historians would debate the strategic bombing campaign's merits, but the tactic that helped make it decisive was clear: attack German air defenses themselves, stripe German fuel production to force fighters to defend it, then engage and destroy those defensive fighters in the air. Repeat until there are no fighters left.
then attack everything else unopposed. By January 1944, the Luftwaffe's single-engine fighter strength had fallen by 30.3%. By February, it had fallen by 56%. The losses were devastating and unsustainable. By spring 1944, the Luftwaffe was fighting a losing war, and everyone knew it. Technology played a role, but so did tactics and will. The P-51D, the production model introduced in the summer of 1944, carried 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns and a total of 1,840 rounds. Each gun fired about 850 rounds per minute, so when all six fired together, the P-51D put roughly 100 rounds into the air each second.
From 200 to 300 yards, the Mustang's 6.50 caliber machine guns created a deadly cone of fire that tore apart anything caught in it. The Packard Merlin engine produced 1,490 horsepower under normal conditions and up to 1,720 in emergencies. Its two-stage, two-speed supercharger kept strong power even at high altitudes, allowing the P-51D to reach 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. It could fly as high as 41,900 feet and climb at 3,200 feet per minute. With drop tanks, its range was over 1,650 nautical miles. Now compare that to the Luftwaffe's early fighters. The Messerschmitt Bf-109G could reach 398 miles per hour at 22,000 feet, but could only stay in the air for less than 2 hours. The Focke-Wulf 190A could match the Mustang's speed at low altitude, but struggled above 25,000 feet. Both German fighters were dangerous, but they were designed for short-range defense, not long escort missions that lasted for hours. Fuel quality also played a big role. American aviation gasoline was 130 octane, sometimes up to 150, depending on the mix. This allowed higher boost pressures and more powerful engine settings without damage. By contrast, German fuel quality dropped as the war went on because their synthetic fuel factories were bombed repeatedly. By late 1944, German planes were forced to use lower-octane fuel that reduced their performance. But technical numbers only tell part of the story. They don't explain why, under Don Blakeslee's leadership, the 4th Fighter Group became the top-scoring American unit in Europe. They don't explain why German pilots began to avoid fighting P-51s whenever possible. And they don't explain why Luftwaffe commander Hermann Göring, when he saw Mustangs over Berlin, said, "I knew the war was lost." The real answer was leadership. Blakeslee's leadership was aggressive, relentless, and creative. He understood a key truth. In air combat, the side that attacks first, attacks decisively, and never stops attacking, wins. On June 21, 1944, Blakeslee led 65 P-51 Mustangs on the first shuttle mission from England to Russia, escorting bombers across Poland and landing at the Soviet airfield of Piriton. The mission covered over 1,470 miles and lasted more than 7 hours. Blakeslee navigated through unfamiliar territory using 19 charts crammed into his cockpit, facing bad weather and enemy fighters. Not a single bomber was lost under his command. These shuttle missions proved the Mustang's incredible range and showed that the 8th Air Force could strike Germany from multiple directions. German defenders could no longer predict where attacks would come from or where the fighters would return to base. The psychological effect was devastating. Throughout the summer of 1944, the 4th Fighter Group rampaged across German skies. They struck airfields, destroyed parked aircraft, attacked transport networks, and provided close air support for ground forces after D-Day. They hunted down every Luftwaffe plane they could find with a ferocity that became legendary. By September 1944, senior American commanders realized that pilots like Blakeslee couldn't stay in combat forever. High-scoring aces were dying, and experienced leaders were being lost. Blakeslee was ordered to step down from combat duty. By that time, he had flown more combat missions and hours than any other American fighter pilot in the war,
over 500 operational sorties, and 1,000 hours of combat flying. He had been wounded 9 times, earned 9 Purple Hearts, and was still alive, still fighting, still wanting more. On November 19, 1944, Don Blakeslee left the 4th Fighter Group. His official record listed 15.5 aerial victories and 2 on the ground, but many historians believe the true number was much higher. Blakeslee often credited kills to junior pilots to build their confidence and morale. He never painted victory marks on his aircraft, he never gave his plane a name, and he never sought fame.
At combat ranges of 200 to 300 yards, the Mustang's guns made a deadly cone of fire that tore apart anything caught inside it. The Packard Merlin engine produced 1,490 horsepower in normal operation and up to 1,720 in emergency power. Thanks to its 2-stage, 2-speed supercharger, the P-51D could reach 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, had a service ceiling of about 41,900 feet, and could climb at 3,200 feet per minute. With drop tanks, its operational range exceeded 1,650 nautical miles. Compare that to the Luftwaffe's fighters. The Messerschmitt Bf-109G could reach 398 miles per hour at 22,000 feet, but had less than 2 hours endurance. The Focke-Wulf 190A could match the Mustang's speed at low altitude, but fell off above 25,000 feet. Both German fighters were formidable, but they were built for short-range defense, not for long escort missions that lasted many hours. Fuel quality also mattered. American aviation gasoline was 130 octane, sometimes blended to 130 to 150, which let Allied engines run higher boost without knocking. German fuel quality fell as the war went on because synthetic fuel plants were bombed. By late 1944, German fighters were using lower octane fuel that reduced their performance. But numbers alone don't tell the whole story. They don't explain why Don Blakeslee's 4th Fighter Group became the highest-scoring American fighter unit in Europe. They don't explain why German pilots began avoiding P-51s whenever possible. And they don't fully explain why Luftwaffe Chief Hermann Göring, seeing Mustangs over Berlin, said, "I knew the jig was up." The deeper reason was leadership. Blakeslee's leadership was aggressive, relentless, and inventive. He understood a vital truth. In air combat, the side that strikes first and never stops attacking gains a decisive advantage. On June 21, 1944, Blakeslee led 65 P-51 Mustangs on the first shuttle mission from England to Russia, escorting bombers across Poland and landing at the Soviet airfield of Pyryatyn. The mission covered more than 1,470 miles and lasted over 7 hours. Blakeslee navigated unfamiliar routes using 19 charts crammed into his cockpit, faced bad weather and enemy fighters, and lost no bombers under his command. These shuttle missions showed the Mustang's extraordinary range and the 8th Air Force's ability to hit Germany from new directions. German defenders could not predict where attacks would come from or where fighters would return to base. The psychological impact was devastating. Through the summer of 1944, the 4th Fighter Group rampaged across German skies. They struck airfields, destroyed parked aircraft, hit transport networks, and provided close air support after D-Day. They hunted down any Luftwaffe planes they could find, with a ferocity that made them legendary. By September 1944, American commanders realized pilots like Blakeslee could not fight forever. High-scoring aces were being lost, experienced leaders were disappearing. Blakeslee was ordered out of frontline combat. By then, he had flown more combat missions and logged more combat hours than any other American fighter pilot in the war, over 500 operational sorties and more than 1,000 combat hours. He had been wounded 9 times and earned 9 Purple Hearts.
Still, he kept fighting until he was ordered to stop. On November 19, 1944, Don Blakeslee left the 4th Fighter Group. Officially, he had 15.5 aerial victories and 2 ground victories, though many historians believe his true tally was higher. Blakeslee often credited junior pilots with kills to build their confidence, never painted victory marks on his plane, never named his aircraft, and avoided publicity. He had one simple aim: destroy the Luftwaffe. The numbers tell the strategic story. From January to May 1944, the Luftwaffe lost thousands of fighters and hundreds of irreplaceable veteran pilots. By June 6, 1944, D-Day, Allied air superiority over Western Europe was complete. The Luftwaffe could only mount a few defense missions against the invasion beaches. With thousands of ships and millions of troops exposed in open water, the Allied amphibious invasion of history scale went forward with near-air supremacy because the Luftwaffe had been beaten in the months before. The 8th Air Force's monthly heavy bomber loss rate fell from 5.1% in 1943 to 1.9% in 1944. Bomber crews who faced a 77% loss rate in 1942-43 suddenly had a 74% chance of surviving a 30-mission tour. The difference was a fighter escort that could go all the way to the target and back. By war's end, under Blakeslee's leadership, the 4th had destroyed over 1,000 enemy aircraft in the air and on the ground, making it the highest-scoring American fighter group in the European theater. By the end, 15 of the 8th Air Force's fighter groups converted to the P-51 Mustang. Only the 56th Fighter Group kept its P-47 Thunderbolts, partly because of pride in its established combat record. Over 15,500 P-51 Mustangs were built during World War II, serving in dozens of air forces worldwide. But it was in German skies, escorting heavy bombers against German defenses, that the Mustang defined its legacy. Don Blakeslee retired from the U.S. Air Force as a colonel in 1965. He served in Korea, commanded the 27th Fighter Escort Wing, and flew F-84 Thunderjets. He continued flying into the jet age, but avoided publicity and refused interviews about his wartime record. His daughter later said he didn't want attention, he only wanted to do his duty. Blakeslee died September 3, 2008, 8 days before his 91st birthday, and was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery on September 18th. The 4th Fighter Wing performed a flyover. The irony is rich and layered. A plane originally designed as a low-level tactical fighter became the main high-altitude escort. A pilot who joined a foreign air force before his own country entered the war became one of America's most decorated combat flyers. A group formed of former RAF volunteers became the top-scoring American fighter unit in Europe. And the man who wanted no glory, who often gave his victories away to others, became the symbol of aggressive fighter leadership that defined an era. The P-51 Mustang did not beat the Luftwaffe alone. Strategic bombing, superior logistics, overwhelming industrial production, tactical innovation, and thousands of brave airmen all played their parts. But the Mustang made it possible to take the war directly to Germany's doorstep and keep it there until German air defenses collapsed. Don Blakeslee showed everyone how to use that power most effectively. On the morning of February 28, 1944, when Blakeslee told his pilots they would learn to fly the Mustang on the way to the target, he was not reckless. He had been counted out, but he understood his men. He knew the Mustang was forgiving and reliable, and he knew the Luftwaffe would not wait for the 4th to finish a formal training program. Every day of delay meant more lost bombers and more aircrew who never returned. So he took the risk, betting the lives of his pilots, his reputation, and his group's combat effectiveness on his belief that experienced fighter pilots could adapt quickly under pressure. He was right. It wasn't that the P-51 was simply easy to fly, though it was easier than many, but that his pilots trusted it completely. When Don Blakeslee said, "We can do this," they believed him. When he led from the front, they followed. When he demanded excellence, they delivered. That is leadership. Not words, not slogans on a squadron wall, and not bureaucratic rules about aircraft assignment. Leadership is understanding your people's abilities, giving them the tools they need, clearing obstacles from their path, and then trusting them to complete the mission. Blakeslee did all of that, and the result changed the air war. From spring 1944, the Luftwaffe never recovered.
They built more fighters, but without enough fuel, they couldn't properly train new pilots. They developed revolutionary aircraft like the Me-262 jet fighter, but they never had enough of them to change the war's outcome. In the end, the Luftwaffe fought bravely, but it was a defensive fight, a losing fight. By 1945, Allied fighters dominated German skies so completely that the Royal Air Force resumed daylight bombing for the first time since 1940. Don Blakeslee and the pilots of the 4th Fighter Group, flying their P-51 Mustangs, helped make that possible. Not in a single night, not in one final battle, but through hundreds of missions, thousands of hours of combat, and relentless pressure that never stopped. They gave the enemy no time to recover, never settled for good enough, and never stopped pushing forward. Their mission was clear: destroy the Luftwaffe. And they did. Mission accomplished. The P-51 Mustang was an incredible machine, perhaps the best piston engine fighter ever built. But airplanes don't win wars. People do. People who understand the mission. People are completely committed to seeing it through. People who refuse to accept limits, who lead by example, and who never give up. Don Blakeslee was one of those people. And when the Luftwaffe pilots looked up and saw Mustangs flying over Berlin, they weren't just seeing an airplane. They were seeing his will, his aggression, his determination to carry the war to the enemy and never look back. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode.